Questions without notice. Give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, Middle Australia is hurting. Labor's inflationary budget is putting upward pressure on interest rates. Labor's aged care policy is causing nursing homes to close down. Labor's industrial relations policies consistently ignore and then harm small businesses. And Labor's gas market intervention is increasing power bill pain. Middle Australia is hurting. Why does Australia always suffer when Labor makes it worse for them?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker.
Order.
And I'm asked about Middle Australia. Well, Middle Australia cares about the wages that they receive, and wages are increasing under this government. I tell you what Middle Australia cares about. They care about their kids getting access to cheaper childcare. That's what they care about. I tell you what Middle Australia cares about, particularly in our regions. They care about manufacturing jobs. That's what Middle Australia cares about. I tell you what Middle Australia cares about. They want to be able to go to the doctor. Order. They want to be able to go to the doctor for free and receive bulk billing. And 11 million Australians in Middle Australia will be able to do that as a result of this government's actions. I tell you what Middle Australia care about. Middle Australia want to pay less for their medicines, and under our government they will. I tell you what Middle Australia cares about. When it comes to aged care workers, 250,000 of them will receive a pay increase. That's what Middle Australia cares about. They're so out of touch. They only talk to each other about themselves. They should get out there and talk to Middle Australia about what their concerns are. Because when I was out and about, after the fantastic budget delivered by the Treasurer just 2 weeks ago, when I visited Cook and Macon and Spence and McEwen and Fadden and Brisbane and Higgins, and yes, even Goldstein, out and about talking with Australians about what their concern was, what they were pleased with was the fact that this is a government that has their back. This is a government that is delivering for Middle Australia, and that's what our budget did.
Call to the honourable member for Lalor.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government working to strengthen Australia's relationship with India? And how important is Prime Minister Modi's visit to Australia this week?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Lalor for her question, and I indeed will be delighted to welcome Prime Minister Modi to Australia today. It will be our 6th meeting that we've had together since I was sworn in as Prime Minister 1 year ago today. It shows how important the relationship between Australia and India is. India will grow to be the 3rd largest economy in the world. It's already the most populous country in the world, and it's an important neighbour in the Indian Ocean that we share. And that is why this is a relationship that we need to invest in. Tonight I will have the privilege of joining Prime Minister Modi on stage at Kudos Bank Arena in Sydney. This event will celebrate Australia's large and vibrant Indian community. And Australia is a better place because of the contribution of the Indian diaspora. They have brought the spirit of the world's largest democracy to Australia and helped make our democracy stronger and more inclusive. And I note that last night the new Lord Mayor of Parramatta, I congratulate Lord Mayor Pandey on his election, the first Indian Australian to hold such a high office in local government in what is Sydney's 2nd CBD, and very much a centre of the community. Prime Minister Modi and I are optimistic that we'll conclude discussions on the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement before the end of the year. That will create Australian jobs, helping our industries prosper, sparking growth and innovation. When I was in India in March, we announced the presence of opening of the first ever foreign university to operate in India, Deakin University, that will be operating in Gujarat, and it will be followed by Wollongong University, again providing such an important arrangement. And one of the things that's happening with our population in Australia is the return of Indian students to Australia, something that this side of the House welcomes because of the difference that it will make. Renewable energy is also a focus on our partnership. Our businesses are already cooperating on that renewable energy partnership, and we're extending the critical minerals partnership as well. Our security and defence links are growing, and Australia will host Exercise Malabar for the first time this year. India is a key strategic partner. We have a rich friendship. We have a very affectionate sporting rivalry, of course, on the cricket fields of the world, and we'll, of course, contest the championship once again later, very shortly. We are both part of a growing and dynamic region, and Prime Minister Modi is a very welcome visitor to our shores.
On indulgence, I'll call the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, I want to join with the Prime Minister in his words of welcome to Prime Minister Modi. I saw him last 18 months ago, and I look forward to seeing him tonight in Sydney and a bilateral meeting tomorrow in Sydney. It's an opportunity to reinforce the bipartisan nature of our approach to our relationship with India. An incredibly important diaspora community here in this country. I was having dinner with some friends, Indian friends in Sydney the other night, just talking about their story of success. Some of them had come here as students, have amassed incredible success and wealth in some cases, but their adoption to our country has been a remarkable story. The depth of our relationship now through the Quad, the importance of our discussions in relation to a number of areas, it's only just starting, and the opportunities ahead for our two countries to grow even closer together, given particularly Prime Minister Modi's approach to our country, the welcome nature of the Indian people, the way in which we're able to work together, and to have the fierce competition on the sporting field, as the Prime Minister points out, creates for a very exciting dynamic into the future, and the possibilities with this relationship are absolutely endless, and I look forward to seeing many Indian friends in Sydney over the next 24 hours.
Give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. The words Middle Australia somehow made it into the budget talking points last week, but the problem is they were completely forgotten from the budget itself. The word infrastructure didn't even make it into the talking points, let alone the Treasurer's speech.
Order.
And now the Prime Minister is going to bring in a further 1.5 million people over 5 years. At the same time, he is cutting infrastructure and raising taxes. Middle Australia is hurting, and why does Labor keep making it worse?
The time had expired, but there was a question just at the end about Labor again. I just remind members to put the question in before the 30-second mark. If there's some after that, that's okay, but the question needs to be in before the 30-second mark. The question needs to be in within the 30 seconds. Order. The member for McEwen. Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker,
Order.
that mess of a question was messier than the last government. They actually workshop these things in a meeting and come out and put it in writing. That word
Order.
salad, that I'm asked
member
about.
for McNamara.
And to return to the issue of Middle Australia.
Order.
And our commitments that we made. We promised that 1.2 million families would pay less for childcare. Yeah. Are we delivering that?
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
We promised that Australians would pay less for their medicine. Are we delivering that?
Yep.
We promised We promised to boost bulk billing and to strengthen Medicare. Are we
O'Connor.
delivering that? We promised to rebuild manufacturing and establish a National Reconstruction Fund. Are we delivering that? We promised a Royal Commission on robo-debt, and boy have we delivered that. We promised to increase the minimum wage. Was that delivered?
Yep, absolutely.
We promised to look after aged care workers. Was that delivered?
Yep.
We promised to lift wages. Was that delivered?
Yep.
We promised to have climate change targets of 43% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. Was that delivered?
Yep.
We promised to have a safeguard mechanism. Is
Order.
that being delivered?
Yep.
The truth is we on this side did the hard
Member for
work in
Gippsland.
opposition to develop policy to implement in government. Policies deliberately aimed at Middle Australia to make a difference after the wreck
Member for Deakin and the
that
member
we
for New England.
replaced, who were more concerned with themselves and ever since the election are more concerned with themselves still. But the opposition leader, of course, has a meeting tomorrow. He may well not be here at 2 o'clock. I look forward to that.
Order. The call to the member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How has the Albanese Labor government worked to build a stronger, fairer and more secure economy following years of neglect, and how will it continue this work in the months and years ahead?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Boothby for her question and congratulate her on her first year of giving the people of Boothby the representation that they need and deserve in that really lovely part of Adelaide. Mr Speaker, Australians have every right to be proud of what our nation has achieved together over the past 12 months. The most jobs created under a new government on record and unemployment near a 50-year low. Wages have started moving again after nearly a decade of stagnation and deliberate suppression. And we have begun the hard yards of repairing our nation's finances, not in an end in themselves, but as a foundation for everything we want to do for our people. Now, we know that Australians are under the pump, and that's what motivates the Albanese government each and every day as we work to take some of the edge off these cost of living pressures without adding to inflation, and as we clear away the wreckage and the debris of a wasted decade in this country. We are delivering, as the Prime Minister said, cheaper early childhood education, cheaper medicines, cheaper education with fee-free TAFE. We are expanding paid parental leave. We're taking the sting out of energy price rises through price caps while providing bill rebates to more than 5 million households and 1 million small businesses. We're increasing the base rate for payments like JobSeeker, Youth Allowance and AusStudy. We successfully advocated for wage increases for minimum and award wage workers and funded pay rises for those in the aged care sector as well. And we are increasing the maximum rate of Commonwealth rent assistance by 15%, its biggest increase in over 3 decades. But, Mr Speaker, at the same time as we've delivered this responsible cost of living relief, we are laying the foundations for future growth by investing in skills and training and supporting businesses to innovate and grow, so that we can ensure our economy manages and maximises some of the big shifts that are underway, like the growth of the care economy, the possibilities of data and digital, and the vast industrial and economic opportunities of net zero. This month's budget was an important part of pursuing our economic agenda, but there's more to be done in the months ahead. A wellbeing framework, an intergenerational report, an employment white paper, and more work to be done on financial market reform and sustainable finance as well. Mr Speaker, a year ago today, the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister and a handful of us were sworn in for the first time, and we are grateful for the opportunity to serve the Australian people and to do what we can to strengthen their economy. There is lots we can be proud of from our first 12 months, but we do know that a lot of Australians are doing it tough. We do know that there's plenty more work to do to strengthen our economy and to deliver more opportunities for more Australians in more parts of our great country.
Give the call to the honourable member for Ryan.
Question to the Minister for the Environment. Last week, the World Meteorological Organisation warned global temperatures could reach 1.5 degrees in the next 5 years, while at the same time you approved a new export coal mine in Queensland that will reportedly produce 500,000 tonnes of coal a year and destroy koala habitat. Minister, why is Labor approving new coal mines in the middle of a climate emergency, and how many more coal and gas projects will you approve in the coming months?
Give the call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thank you. I want to thank the member for her question, and I want to say how proud I am to be part of a government that is acting on climate change, the first government to take serious action on climate change. And it's been really instructive watching those on the crossbench line up with the Liberals and Nationals all too often to prevent and delay that action. On this side, we want to transition to renewable energy, and we're looking for a renewable energy target of 82%. 82% by 2030, because it's cheaper and because it's better for the environment. Those opposite engaged in a lost decade of climate action. In contrast, I have approved 11 renewable energy projects since taking government at more than twice the rate of those opposite. And in fact, as well as those renewable energy projects that we've approved, I've got 101 additional renewable energy projects in the pipeline that will come before me for approval in coming months. I'm also, incidentally, the first Environment Minister in Australian history to reject a coal mine, so you might remember that when you're thinking about this stuff. I'm very proud of what we're doing to become a renewable energy superpower on this side. We're catching up on a wasted decade by legislating emissions reductions of 43% by 2030 and zero net emissions by 2050. We're invested in the last budget $2 billion for green hydrogen, because we know that that will help make us a renewable energy superpower exporter. We've got $1.6 billion for home and small business electrification in the budget. We've passed the safeguard mechanism, which will see emissions come down. We've got $20 billion for rewiring the nation, upgrading our transmission lines, because those opposite were so hopeless for 10 years that our transmission network can't cope with all of the renewable energy that we want to put into the network. We've got $3 billion in the National Reconstruction Fund for clean energy projects, green steel, green aluminium, green industrial chemicals.
The Minister will resume her seat. The member for McEwen will cease interjecting. The Leader of the Australian Greens on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker, on relevance, there's 30 seconds to go and the Minister hasn't mentioned that new coal mine she approved once. That was the subject of the question.
And the question was also about government policy and reports and koala habitats and projects, of which the Minister is being relevant to. So if she strays, she will be pulled into line. But at the moment, she's being directly relevant. Give her the call.
Sorry, it's a shame we've only got 30 seconds left, because we've got a lot more on this side of the ledger for what we're doing to protect the environment, including signing up to the Methane Pledge, including legislating for better ozone protections, including changing our Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act to better protect nature, including investing in electric cars and all of those things that will see us reduce emissions on this side.
Order. Give the call to the honourable member for Tangney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government undoing previous attack on Medicare and making it easier for Australians to see a doctor?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Tangi for his question, because he knows after 9 years of cuts and neglect to Medicare, it has never been harder than it is today to see a doctor. And he also knows the pressure on bulk billing rates in WA because they are some of the most severe anywhere in the country. That's why he campaigned so hard, Mr Speaker, on our promise to strengthen Medicare, and our budget 2 weeks ago delivered on that promise, with $6 billion in new investments to strengthen Medicare, including the centrepiece, an initiative to triple the bulk billing incentive, what we describe in Labor as the beating heart of Medicare. And I was delighted, Mr Speaker, to have the opportunity last week to meet with the member for Tangi and a number of doctors in Willetton in his electorate and talk about the difference that that initiative would make to the 74,000 people who live in his electorate who are eligible for bulk billing incentives. But the member for Tangi also knows, Mr Speaker, that the challenge in finding a doctor is often the most acute when someone in your family needs urgent care, when your kid falls off the skateboard and breaks their arm, when there's a deep laceration that needs urgent stitching, these non-life-threatening emergencies that could quite adequately be dealt with out in the community in a primary care setting. Instead, Mr Speaker, though, we know that every year in Australia there are more than 4 million presentations to emergency departments classified as non-urgent or semi-urgent, many of which could be dealt with in a primary care setting. This means more pressure on hospital emergency departments. It means patients waiting for hours and hours to get treatment they should be able to get in the community. And Mr Speaker, that is why Labor committed to funding 50 urgent care clinics across Australia, including one around Murdoch in the member for Tangi's electorate, open 7 days a week, extended hours from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m, open for walk-in patients and, Mr Speaker, most importantly, fully bulk billed. All you have to take is your Medicare card. And last week I visited the first site in Perth with the Minister for Early Childhood and the Assistant Minister to the Prime Minister, and over coming weeks more sites will be announced, with all 58 clinics now up and delivering services over the course of this year, which we promised in the election. We've received huge support from states and territories who are now driving many of the expression of interest processes, and huge interest in general practices that want to take their practice to the next level, Mr Speaker, and submitting tenders under this process. Mr Speaker, our network of fully bulk-billed urgent care clinics are going to make it easier to get the care you need when you need it out in the community. They're going to take pressure off hospital emergency departments across Australia. It's all part of Labor's plan to strengthen Medicare.
Call to the honourable member for Riverina. Order.
My question is to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories. Will the minister guarantee that the Life-Saving Roads to Recovery program will remain in existence?
Give the call to the Minister for Regional Development. Order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Very important question. Simple answer, yes.
Give the call to the order. And the House comes to order. The Minister for International Development will not interject. I'll hear from the member for Blair.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. What mess did the Albanese Labor government inherit in the defence portfolio, and what actions are taken to address this over the past 12 months in order to keep Australians safe?
Order. Give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Defence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. And it was great to be with him at the 150th Ipswich show on Friday. Mr Speaker, a year ago today, the Albanese government took office, and it has been a transformational 12 months for our nation's security, because this time last year it was all very different. Under the former government, Australia was drifting through a sea of broken relationships, with great powers, with friends, with countries which should be our friends, and with our region. There was a culture of making grand defence announcements on the basis of absolutely nothing. $42 billion worth of defence programs without a cent behind them. And when those opposite did spend money, they were completely out of control. 28 different defence programs running a combined 97 years over time. They worked out that the world had become a complicated place, but they were incapable of making the difficult decisions to give rise to a strategic response, and that's because the Defence Ministry was a revolving door. Really 7 different defence ministers during the Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison government.
Order. The Deputy Prime Minister resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition entitled to raise a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, it's on relevance. I mean, there's no mention yet of AUKUS and the relationship with the US and the UK delivered during that period. It'd be relevant. It'd be relevant to
resume your seat. The order. There is far too much noise. The Deputy Prime Minister in continuation.
Order. In 9.5 years, Mr Speaker, 24 different ministers in the defence portfolio, because they saw being Defence Minister as a trophy and they saw the Defence Force as simply an opportunity to raise money for the Liberal Party. Well, all of that has completely changed. In our first 100 days in office, we commissioned the Defence Strategic Review, and the government's response to it has retasked our Defence Force for the first time in 35 years, giving it a clear direction for a new strategic posture, because we are able to make the difficult decision to prioritise money where it's needed most. We now do have a pathway for acquiring a nuclear-powered submarine capability, with the first Australian-flagged submarine in the water a full decade earlier than what was anticipated this time last year. We are growing the defence budget significantly beyond what those provided, and we have completely transformed our standing in the world, being treated far more seriously by our allies and beginning the process of stabilising our relationship with China. But, Mr Speaker, there is much more to be done, because this is long-term policy which actually requires application and follow-through. And we know there are going to be many more difficult decisions ahead, but we're up for that because we understand the consequence of this moment, and we are completely committed to giving this country a government which will keep them safe.
Call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Prime Minister. In the May budget, the government has made cuts to infrastructure and referred hundreds of congestion-busting projects to yet another review. Yet the government's own budget papers say a further 1.5 million people will come to Australia over 5 years. Why is this government putting at risk projects like upgrades to the M5 motorway and the Western Sydney Airport Metro Rail?
The Minister for Immigration will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister. Order. Members on my right. There is far too much noise. A general warning to members on my right has now been issued. The Prime Minister will be heard in silence. Give him the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I'm asked a question about infrastructure. I'm asked a question as well about infrastructure around Badgerys Creek Airport, remarkably, from a minister who presided over the purchase of land that had been valued at $3 million for over $30 million. Over $30 million. I would have thought if there was one issue, one word that should never pass that minister's former minister's lips, it is Leppington. Leppington. Because Leppington is a great reminder of how hopeless that they were in delivering value for money. And if you want to look at why you would have a review of projects where they paid more than 10 times what it had been valued at, then that is a great example. But we on this side of the House, of course, in the budget have our infrastructure commitments that we made, all of which will be delivered. We had previously the absurd question about roads to recovery,
the manager has asked his
which
question.
is funded in the budget papers. We are a government that have always delivered for local government. We believe, indeed, that local government is best placed to deliver community infrastructure, because they can determine what local priorities are. They have proper auditing procedures.
Order.
And it's far better than setting up a committee of a few people sitting around with colour-coded spreadsheets deciding where taxpayers' money would be used. That's what they did.
Prime Minister will pause. The Minister for Home Affairs will cease interjecting so I can hear from the Manager of Opposition Business on point.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, the questions about the M5 motorway, Western Sydney Airport Metro Rail. It was not about local government and local projects. I'd have thought this Prime Minister, of all people, should know the difference between local infrastructure and major road and rail projects.
Order. The question was also about budgets cuts to infrastructure and other projects. I'm listening carefully to the Prime Minister. Order. And I'll make sure he stays relevant to the question. He has the call.
Projects are actually under construction. I would have thought that he would be. They're funded. The money has been forwarded, of course, our portion to the New South Wales government for those important projects. But I make this point. When I became Infrastructure Minister, I inherited 12 years of the Howard government where it's really easy to recognise the big change that occurred, which was instead of $0 being spent for not a single urban rail project anywhere in Australia over 12 years, we increased rail funding by more than 10 times. And I'll make this point about their performance on infrastructure, where Inland Rail, originally costed at under $10 billion, has been costed at $31 billion without going to a port anywhere, literally inland. Won't deliver anything to a port.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. The call to the member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Resources. How has the Albanese Labor government delivered for the critical minerals industry in its first year?
Good question.
Give the call to the Minister for Resources and the Minister for Northern Australia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for Pearce for her question and for her ongoing and enduring support for the resources sector of this country. Mr Speaker, this government recognises the role of critical minerals in our net zero ambitions and the role critical minerals will play in helping Australia and the world to decarbonise. As I have said before, the road to net zero runs through Australia's resources sector. Over these past 12 months since the election, the Albanese government has been delivering in spades for the Australian critical minerals sector. Last weekend, the Prime Minister met with President Biden and enhanced Australia's relationship with the US by establishing climate, critical minerals and clean energy alongside defence and economic cooperation as the third pillar of the Australia-United States alliance. And this is encapsulated in the Climate, Critical Minerals and Clean Energy Transformation Compact signed by the Prime Minister and the President last week. As part of this compact, I'll gladly be spearheading a new Australia-US task force on critical minerals that will fast-track critical minerals supply chain development between our two countries. This task force will be administered by my department in cooperation with the US National Security Council. This is a very important step and a significant step for the critical minerals and rare earths industry of this nation. But that's just one of the many ways this government is helping to build the critical minerals industry in this country since taking power. We've also entered into agreements on investment and development of critical minerals and rare earth elements with Japan, the United Kingdom, Germany, Korea, France and India. And it does not end there. I recently announced close to $50 million in grants to 13 projects across Australia as part of the second tranche of the Critical Minerals Development Program. Those grants are expected to drive up to $120 million of private sector investment and support up to 900 jobs, including around 100 roles for First Nations Australians. These projects will produce critical minerals such as cobalt.
Interjects again will be warned.
such as cobalt, graphite, high-purity alumina, tungsten and rare earths, and provide key inputs into strategic supply chains. The support for the sector does not stop there, Mr Speaker. We also, in the recent budget, announced $57 million, the International Partnerships Program, aimed at securing strategic and commercial partnerships, and, of course, $23 million to extend the operation of the all-important Critical Minerals Office. This is in addition to the government's $1 billion Value-Adding in Resources Fund that is part of the $15 billion National Reconstruction, of course, the fund that those opposite failed to support. And this National Reconstruction Fund will support the development of our critical minerals, which those opposite used to say they support, but of course in abandoning the space in supporting the National Reconstruction Fund, they have too abandoned the critical minerals sector of this country.
Give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, the Minister referred to a number of documents in her answer. She referred to a compact, she referred to agreements with Japan and Korea and so on. Will the Minister table those documents?
I'll hear from the Leader of the House. But
the standing order to the point of order, the standing order in reference to practice is if somebody is reading from a document, not whether they mention them.
I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Serious issue, Mr Speaker, and there's a history in this parliament where ministers read verbatim every word from a document that they should table that document. And I would ask you to ask her to table that document.
The Minister, listening. Order. The Minister for Home Affairs. I was listening carefully to the Minister. She was talking about the reports. I don't believe she was reading directly from the reports. Was the Minister reading from confidential documents? I give the call to the member for Flinders. Order.
Government.
Just resume your seat. I'll just wait till broadcasting is working so I can hear from the member for Flinders.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. In the May budget, the government has made further cuts to infrastructure and referred hundreds of congestion-busting projects to yet another infrastructure review. Yet the government's own budget papers say a further 1.5 million people will come to Australia over 5 years. Why is this government putting at risk projects like the Melbourne Airport rail line, where work has now been halted?
Call to the Prime Minister. Order.
I'm very pleased to get a question
Order.
about infrastructure from the member for Flinders. She has a look at the budget papers. There are no cuts in the budget papers. The dollars remain attached. Why don't you have a look at the budget papers?
The member for Fisher.
And whoever gave you that
Cease
question,
interjecting.
I think the Tactics Committee need to reconsider their strategy. As the Treasurer said, the next level from asking me questions about infrastructure will be asking me questions about South Sydney Rugby League Football Club.
Give the call to the member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to close the labour hire loophole that currently lets employers undercut workers' pay?
Give the call to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations and Minister for the Arts.
Thanks, Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Hunter for the question, and also thank him for taking me out to Mount Thorley last week to meet with miners there, and also to thank the member for Hunter, just like his neighbour, the member for Patterson, for being people in this chamber who have been tireless in fighting for the wages and conditions of mine workers. Absolutely tireless. When I was there last week, one of the workers I met with had only recently become a permanent employee of the company. He'd worked for 10 years as a labour hire employee. Now, he didn't blame the company for this. He said it's all over the industry, and if it's going to be fixed, it's got to be fixed everywhere. But one of the things he said to me, and I just want to quote, he said, "It's a bit ridiculous, like I was doing the same job as the person I was working beside, with rubbish conditions and being paid less." Now, this is because of a labour hire loophole where in this industry, the casuals, you normally think of casuals in terms of casual loading. Casuals, because of this labour hire loophole, doing the exact same work, don't just lose security, they're even on a lower hourly rate than the permanent workers they're working beside. Now, I know there's been some interest in this in the newspapers over the last couple of days. One business has claimed that they've calculated exactly how much closing the labour hire loophole will cost them. Given that we haven't finalised the legislation, I'm not sure how they did the calculation. But my favourite part was there was a headline there today, and it began with the words "union admits." And I thought, oh no. Whenever you see the word admits, you think, OK, this will be trouble.
Order. The leader of the
and here's what it said. Admits.
Order.
Admits Labor policy aims to drive up pay. They've got us. They've got us. Labor policy aims to drive up pay. That's exactly why we're determined to close the labour loophole, and it's exactly why those opposite are so determined to keep the loophole. They've never seen a tax loophole that they didn't want to keep forever, and they've never seen a loophole that drives down wages that they didn't want to defend just as earnestly. The Managing Opposition businesses describe this as a made-up issue. That's his description for it. Well, it's not a made-up issue if you're a casual working side by side being paid less. It's not a made-up issue for two workers with the same expertise, on the same job, with the same classification, one being paid less than the other. For them, it's not a made-up issue. For the mine workers dealing with this, it's not a made-up issue. And for the government that's determined to act, this is a loophole we're determined to close.
Call to the member for Clark.
Speaker, my question is to the Education Minister. Minister, you'd recall that last year I challenged you about skyrocketing HECS help indexation charges, and you committed to have the Universities Accord panel look at it. Well, here we are 10 months later, and charges are set to rise further by a record 7.1%. Minister, in the circumstances, will you freeze the indexation, at least until the Universities Accord final report is delivered in December?
Call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Clark for his question. You're right, I made a commitment to get the Accord team to look at that, and they're doing that. The Accord team will report at the end of June with its interim report and provide a final report to me at the end of December. The short answer to your question is no. We have made no change to HECS in the budget. What we've done in the budget is provide extra support to students through an increase in youth allowance and AusStudy, and extra support through an increase in rental assistance. That will help a lot of students with the cost of living. More generally, HECS has helped millions and millions of Australians get to university and get a university degree. When I was a little kid, only about 7% of Australians had a university degree. When most of us were knee-high to a grasshopper, very few Australians had a university degree. We're a different country today. Almost 1 in 2 Australians in their 30s has a university degree, and a big part of that is because of HECS, which has helped to fund an increase in the number of students going to university. But that's not true everywhere. In the member for Clark's electorate, it's only about 30%. Where I grew up in Cabramatta, it's about the same. In the member for McMahon's electorate, it's less than that. Only 25% of people in their 30s there have a university degree. In the Treasurer's electorate, it's even lower still, only about 19%, even lower in the bush. And it's an order of magnitude less for our Indigenous brothers and sisters. Only 7% have a university degree. And this is what we've got to fix. The cost of university degrees is important. The cost of living is important. But the cost of those kids from those communities missing out is important too. And this is what we've got to fix. And this, at its core, is what the Universities Accord will be all about.
Call to the member for Aston.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. What has been the uptake of the Albanese Labor government's fee-free TAFE policy? What has been the response?
Call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Well, can I thank the member for Aston for her question and congratulate her on her election, and really thank her for her support for the vet sector. In fact, it wasn't that long ago that the Prime Minister and the Minister for Early Childhood Education and I accompanied the member for Aston to Swinburne University to talk to students about
enrolment in TAFE courses and what it meant by removing cost barriers by having fee-free TAFE arrangements. And they were saying to us that as a result of this initiative, they were enrolling in large numbers. And I'm happy to say we, of course, were aware. Upon election, we had $1 trillion of Liberal Party debt, but we also had a massive skills deficit across the economy. Wherever you looked, whatever profession, whatever trade, whatever sector of the economy, we had shortages. It was that reason we announced at the Jobs and Skills Summit 180,000 fee-free TAFE and VET places, and I'm happy to inform the House today that 150,000 of those places have been filled, and they've been filled by people across this country. That is 60% of those enrollees are women. 30% are in courses in the care economy, a sector of our economy that is absolutely in dire need of supply of labour and skills, and we're seeing it because of the enrolment in these courses. Now, Speaker, it is true to say that not everyone agrees with this approach. The opposition has said that initiatives like this are a waste of money. Will you tell that to students in these TAFE courses that would not have enrolled in these courses if it wasn't for this initiative? Frankly, Speaker, that is not true. And in fact, in speaking to businesses, they say they are crying out for skills, and they understand we have to encourage students to enrol. You just heard the Minister for Education talk about the need for us to increase the opportunities for people to go into higher education. So too with the VET sector. We have to improve our opportunities here. We have in fact the largest skill shortage in the last 5 decades, and we're responding to that in a number of ways. And I'm happy to say it is improving. But can I say, by way of example, and we've met many students in this situation, New South Wales students in hospitality courses would have to find an extra $4,000 to enrol in those courses. In fact, Queensland students in aged care would have to find over $2,000. South Australian cyber security students would have to find over $6,000 in an area that's in critical demand in our economy, and if we did not have this initiative, we would not be supplying these skills. It's therefore critical that we do that and do more. And for that reason, this government's working with state and territory governments to add to this initiative. And we're now planning an additional 300,000 further fee-free TAFE and VET places for the VET sector so we can supply the skills that this economy needs.
Before I call the member for Deakin, I'm pleased to inform the House that today we've had students from St Mary's Primary School, Crookwell, in the member for Humes electorate. Give the call to the member for Deakin.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Housing. The government's own budget papers say a further 1.5 million people will come to Australia over 5 years. But Labor's half-baked Housing Australia Future Fund is only promising to provide 30,000 homes over that same 5-year period. Where will the other 1.47 million people live?
Give the call to the Minister for Housing, Homelessness and Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for his question for another opportunity to talk about our ambitious housing agenda, Mr Speaker. As I would say to the member opposite, of course, we know that under their plan migration would have been higher than it is being predicted in the budget. Indeed, the member for Wannon over here just last year said we need to get our international students back, we need to get our working holiday visa holders back, we need to get all these people back as soon as we can, which shows that they actually wanted more people.
The Minister will pause. The member for Barker will cease interjecting. I'll hear from the member for Deakin.
Look, Mr Speaker, I appreciate we're only 30 seconds into the question, but my question did not invite a comparison. I want the minister to answer the question, and she should refer to the 1.5 million migrants that Labor is bringing in.
The question was also talking about Labor's policy. So I'm just going to invite the minister to return to that part of the question. She is being directly relevant. It was a broad question. If you include statements about Labor's policy or however you describe that, that means the minister can refer to Labor policy as part of the question. And I'll give the call to the minister, 30 seconds in, and I'll be listening carefully to what she says.
And of course, I'm very happy to talk about the Housing Australia Future Fund, the fund that they are opposing, both down here where they voted against it and still holding up a vote in the Senate on it. 30,000 social and affordable rental homes that you are not supporting, that could be on the ground faster. homes for people that need it most.
The member
right?
for
Homes
Deakin
for people that need it most.
rejecting.
We
So
have
Member
moved
for Lawler.
immediately by unlocking $575 million
Order.
for more social and affordable rental homes. We had the National Housing Accord in our last budget and funding for another 10,000 affordable homes to be matched by the states and territories with another 10,000 affordable homes. 20,000 affordable homes coming out of the National Housing Accord. And of course, in the last budget, another $2 billion in financing for the National Housing Finance Investment Corporation, which will be up to another 7,000 affordable rental homes, Mr Speaker. We are investing at every opportunity in more homes. The build-to-rent changes in the budget, Mr Speaker. The build-to-rent changes, the Property Council has said will be between 150,000 and 200,000 additional units here in Australia because of changes that our government made, Mr Speaker. Those opposite had no plan when it came to housing. We have a plan, and the Housing Australia Future Fund is part of that. It's critical to it in terms of building capacity in the community housing sector, in terms of leveraging institutional investment. We want this fund to get through the Senate, and every day of delay is at the fault of senators on your party and of the Greens party. These are homes for people that need it most. These are homes for women and children fleeing family violence. They're homes for older women at risk of homelessness. Homes for our veterans who are at risk of homelessness. We want to get more homes on the ground more quickly, and you are standing in the way of that. We're about to go out to consultation for our National Housing and Homelessness Plan. The other side really need to get out of the way when it comes to the Housing Australia Future Fund. We have a comprehensive, ambitious plan. It is being supported by every state and territory housing minister. It's being supported by the housing peaks. It's being supported by the HIA, by the Master Builders Association. Our Housing Australia Future Fund is being supported by everybody, it would seem, except the Liberal senators and the Green senators. It is being supported because it's a good idea to get more investment into housing right across the country.
Order. The call to the member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment and Water. After a decade of neglect on the environment, how is the Albanese Labor government protecting more of what's precious, restoring more of what's damaged, and managing nature better for our kids and for our grandkids?
Give the call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thanks so much, Mr Speaker. And no government in Australian history has done more for the environment than the Albanese Labor government. And there is no member in this place who is more committed to environmental action than the member for Fremantle. So I thank him for his question.
There is far too much noise on the left.
We are investing more in nature in this budget than has ever been invested in nature in any Australian budget in the past. We are spending more on nature than has ever been spent before because we want to protect more of what's precious, restore more of what's damaged and manage nature better for the future. In our first 12 months, we've passed our net zero legislation. We're setting up our new Environmental Protection Agency and reforming our national environmental laws. That means stronger protection for nature. It also means faster decisions for business. It also means a tougher cop on the beat. We've approved a record number of renewable energy projects. As I said, we've doubled the number that those previously approved. We've also doubled funding to our national parks, precious places like Kakadu and Uluru and Budiri. Of course that's great for nature, but it's also great for jobs. Hundreds of extra regional jobs in tourism, in nature protection, many of those done by First Nations Australians. We're delivering on the Murray-Darling Basin Plan after a decade of sabotage by those opposite. I delivered more environmental water in my first 9 months than those opposite did in 9 years. We're planning to triple the size of the Macquarie Island Marine Park. We're protecting endangered penguins and whales. We're also protecting the sustainable fishery operating down there. We're funding 48 new recycling facilities, 12 already up and running, more funding for recycling through the CEFC and through the National Reconstruction Fund. We're investing $1.2 billion in the Great Barrier Reef, and we have doubled funding for marine science.
Order.
We're also proclaiming 10 new Indigenous protected areas. We're doubling the number of Indigenous rangers. We're establishing a new nature repair market. We've nominated Murujuga for World Heritage listing. We're working on a listing for Cape York as well. We're protecting koalas, the threatened plants and animals and places that make Australia special.
Order.
Do you know, isn't it incredible that under those opposite, we're now at a situation where koalas are endangered on the east coast of Australia? Who ever thought we'd get there? Mr Speaker, we're looking after our urban rivers, we're looking after
Order.
our environment for our
Minister's
kids and our
time has
grandkids so we
concluded.
can leave.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition has continually interjected during question time, and particularly during that last answer. If she interjects one more time, she'll leave the chamber under 94A. The Minister for the Environment will also cease interjecting. Give the call to the honourable member for Warringah.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister, contrary to the misleading statement made earlier about climate policy by the Environment Minister, it's the Albanese government that voted with the coalition to frack the Beetaloo Basin and expand gas expansion, even more harmful to short-term global warming with methane emissions. Recent warnings predict we are going to tip over 1.5 degrees by 2027. Do you accept that it is greenwashing to, on one hand, approve new coal and gas projects when the advice is clear this must stop?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Warringah for her question, and I acknowledge the fact that she has a genuine commitment to act on climate change with the majority of this parliament. But the leadership for that is coming, of course, from government, because it's governments that change policy. It's governments that change direction of a country. And it's this government that inherited more than a decade of denial and delay and neglect when it came to climate change. This government was elected with a platform of 43% reduction by 2030, and we delivered that legislation and that target. This government was elected with a platform of net zero by 2050, and we delivered that. This government was elected with a platform of making renewables 82% of our renewable energy market by 2030. And if you look at what has happened to investment in renewables since we were elected, that is happening. That is happening. And why it's happening is because we provided investment certainty through the safeguard mechanism that was also delivered by this government. In addition to that, we of course have signed the methane pledge at the UNFCCC meeting that was held in December of last year. And just on the weekend, in conjunction with the G7 countries meeting in Japan, I engaged constructively with Germany about the opportunity that is there for hydrogen, with the United Kingdom about the opportunity that is there for exchange of critical minerals and renewables as well, with Prime Minister Modi, who we'll have further discussions with tomorrow about our renewable energy partnership and what is possible for both of our benefit going forward. We continue, of course, as well to engage with the United States, who, through their Inflation Reduction Act, is by far the most significant investment by any government in driving down not just emissions in the United States but globally as well. And with the arrangements that we have that will enable much more cross-fertilisation of engagement through the changes that President Biden is putting forward to Congress, that will open up opportunities for business. What we understand is that good action on climate is good for our economy and good for jobs. That's why we're delivering it, and that's why this government including our Energy Minister and our Environment Minister, will continue to deliver that better future by acting on climate change.
Call to the member for Holt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. How has the Albanese Labor government's approach to our migration system addressed the immediate challenges for businesses and workers, and how is it laying the foundations for a better future for all Australians?
Give the call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thanks, Speaker, and I thank the member for Holt for the question. I recognise her keen interest in immigration policy and also her deep understanding of what the mess left by those opposite means for her community and the aspirations that she's been standing up for in this place so strongly for the last year. Now, when the borders were closed, those opposite had a great opportunity, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to examine and reorientate our immigration system so that it was working for all Australians. But what did they do? No, well, nothing is generous. It was worse than that, because they told people who were here to go home. They told people who were here to go home. They cut visa and migration staff by 20%. And what they did in walking away from their responsibility for the immigration function of national government was leave a terrible mess. A terrible individual mess, but a mess that impacts every Australian and every Australian community today. There were nearly 1 million visas waiting for us. 1 million visas waiting for us. And members opposite should think about this when they think about some of the comments they make about the challenges this government is dealing with. There were nearly 1 million visa applications unattended. They should think about that. Now, today, that number is down by 40%. That number is down by 40%. 70% lower in the temporary visa system, because we also understand that our migration system has got to work with, not opposed to, the other ways in which we regulate our labour market, and particularly the work that's being done by Minister Clare and Minister O'Connor in the education and skills space, instead of running in the opposite direction, as it did for more than a decade, running down our future. The member for New England should reflect on his role in running down our future, I reckon, because he is a gold medal performer in that regard, a gold medal performer. Now, today, businesses, migrants and families around Australia have certainty when they use the visa system. Waiting times are down, particularly for health and education visas, where regional communities in particular are benefiting. Now, the former government left nearly 20,000 skilled regional visa applications pending. Now, these were people who were living and working in regional communities who were left behind by those opposite, people left behind. And we didn't stop at that. We also tripled the number of skilled regional visa places to recognise there are real issues in regional communities, and unlike those opposite, we're not talking about it, we're getting on with fixing the problem. 0 agricultural visas granted by those opposite. I don't know if anything was talked about more by those opposite than the ag visa that delivered not a single visa place. On the other hand, we are getting on with the job. We've got bridging visas down. Bridging visas, a sign of a system in chaos, now down by more than 50%, because we recognise the critical role of immigration in building our economy and supporting Australian communities.
Give the call to the honourable member for Durack.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. Already, 23 aged care homes have closed under this government, compared to 300 that were opened under the former coalition government. This follows the Albanese Labor government's decision to implement the Royal Commission's recommendations and impose rigid constraints on the sector.
Order.
Will the government now make a commitment to expanding the exemption criteria until the current workforce crisis has been addressed?
Give the call to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport.
Oh, thank you, Mr Speaker. I cannot believe that those opposite of all weeks would choose this week to try and lecture the government on management and funding of the aged care system, and to suggest to dare to criticise us for trying to pull every single lever we have at our disposal to try and lift the standard of aged care as quickly as humanly possible. To walk into this chamber and to criticise us for trying to take that action to lift the standard of care for residents. It is unfathomable unbelievable that they have learned nothing after neglecting the sector for 9 long years to walk in now and criticise the people left cleaning up their mess. A workforce crisis that was formed on their watch. A workforce crisis that has taken 11, 12 months to address through working on migration settings with the Minister for Immigration, the Minister for Home Affairs, the Minister for Skills, the Minister for Education, the Minister for Health, the Prime Minister, the Treasurer. Every single minister has had to spend time cleaning up their mess to address the crisis in aged care. And they've seriously walked in today to say you're doing it too fast. You're cleaning up the mess too quickly. How dare you try and address a crisis in an urgent manner? Unbelievable. And yet here we are after 12 months with them having learned nothing.
The Minister will resume her seat. The member for Gellibrand is warned. The member for Deakin, the member for Moncrieff and the member for New England are continually interjecting. You are not sitting, and the member Banks, you're not sitting in your correct seat, so if you do that one more time, you will be removed. I'll give the call to the member for Toorak.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Relevance. The whole of Australia wants to know, is the government going to expand the exemption criteria? Can the minister please address that issue?
Resume your seat. The question contained information regarding the Royal Commission and the issue of aged care facilities being closed. I'm just going to ask the minister to return to the question. She is being relevant, but I'll listen carefully for the remainder half of her answer. She has the call.
I agree the whole of Australia wants us to fix aged care. That I agree with. I agree the whole of Australia went to the election last year and voted for a government that would actually take the aged care crisis seriously. That I agree with. I agree that the whole of Australia considered the two offerings from each of the two parties of government and said, we trust Labor to address this crisis and to try and lift the standard of aged care in this country. And having had 15 long months with the final report of the Royal Commission into aged care, having chosen to address only 9 of 148 recommendations. When the opposition raises the 24/7 nursing policy, they don't have a stance on a 24/7 nursing policy. They don't have a position on 24/7 nurses. They walk in here having not used 15 months to address the problem and still do not have a position on aged care 24/7 nursing policy. They didn't do it. They didn't fund it. They didn't roll it out. They didn't address the workforce crisis that formed on their watch. We are addressing a workforce crisis that stems from 2017 $2.5 billion worth of funding cuts that they chose to make, which set in place a rolling crisis of neglect addressed by a Royal Commission. And even now they walk into this chamber and say, oh, we see that you are urgently acting to address the crisis. How dare you do it so quickly? How dare you act so quickly? We're worried it's too fast. Unbelievable.
The member for Deakin. Order. The member for Deakin was continually interjecting during that answer. He will leave the chamber under 94A. Order. It's far too much noise. I want to hear from the member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Veteran Affairs. How has the Albanese Labor government improved support for veterans in its first 12 months?
Give the call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Minister for Defence Personnel.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Hasluck for her question and congratulate her on her first 12 months as the member for Hasluck. It's been fantastic having her as part of Team WA on this side of the chamber. All Australians can be proud of what we've achieved for Veterans Together over the course of the last year. Supporting defence personnel, veterans and families is one of the key priorities of the Albanese Labor government. When we came into government, the Department of Veterans Affairs was chronically underfunded and under-resourced. That has had serious consequences for veterans. The former Secretary of the department made that clear in estimates last year, that the department, based on the resourcing constraints from the previous government, would have never cleared the veterans' compensation backlog. We've now turned that around. In September last year, the claims backlog was upward of 45,000. Now we're down to about 36,000, a 20% drop from the peak. That's due to the investment of the Albanese Labor government. We're delivering $322.3 million to employ and retain additional staff in DVA to get through the backlog and make sure it never happens again. $341.1 million to fund the modernisation and sustainment of ICT systems that the former government left to degenerate. $46.7 million to fund the delivery of 10 Veterans and Families hubs across the country, unlike the opposition who announced hubs and then didn't fund them. $24 million veteran employment program. We've fixed the backlog in paying invoices to those that provide services to veterans. We've increased the annual totally and permanently incapacitated payment by $1,000. We've enhanced crisis support for working-age veteran families and extended this to grand carer veteran families. We've improved access to mental health supports, including the $22 million to extend the PTSD therapy dog program and $2 million to continue mental health awareness and suicide intervention training. Veterans will also be able to better access GPs with the tripling of the Veterans Access Payment. We've expanded defence home ownership for both defence personnel and veterans, and we're developing a defence and veteran family support strategy. Vitally, we've acted on all 13 recommendations of the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide Interim Report, including fixing staffing and resourcing in the department, bringing the claims backlog down, improving access to information for loved ones, breaking down the barriers that were deterring people from giving evidence to the Royal Commission, and we're reforming more than a century of veterans legislation, which has been an absolute nightmare for veterans and their families, by simplifying this into a single scheme. In just 1 year, we can now confirm that DVA is better funded than it has been in 3 decades. We will ensure we're laying the strongest possible foundations for a better future for our veterans.
Order. Give the call to the member for Bass.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Assistant Treasurer. The Westpac Consumer Sentiment Index reveals some 60% of the fall in consumer sentiment in May is attributed to the federal budget. Middle Australia is hurting. Why does Labor keep making it worse?
The member for Longman will leave the chamber under 94A. I can't believe we even tried that one. Honestly. The Assistant Treasurer has the call.
Thank the member for Bass for her question. We're proud of the budget we delivered 10 days ago. It's a budget that delivers for all Australians and delivers on our election commitments.
Not interject.
It's a budget
anymore.
that ensures that with a hard head we're able to deliver in 12 months what this mob over here couldn't deliver in 9 long years. And that is our budget, which is bringing the finances back under control. And because we did bring the finances back under control, something that they promised to do for over 8 years but couldn't deliver on, we're able to be a budget that also has a big heart to ensure that we can fix the mess that they left us on Medicare. Because when we came into government, Medicare had been flogged to within an inch of its life. We ensured that we are tripling the payments for bulk billing to ensure that those who most need it are able to get to see a doctor. We're making medicines more affordable. We're making childcare more affordable. And as the Minister for Aged Care has just demonstrated in a masterclass of how to respond to the ridiculousness from those opposite, we are ensuring that not only are residents in aged care getting the treatment that they need, but the people who look after them are getting the pay that they deserve. Step after step after step, the budget that we have delivered is ensuring that we're delivering on our promises, building more sustainable finances, but also building a fairer Australia, something that that mob on that side couldn't do in 8 tawdry long years.
Order. Order. Members on my left will cease interjecting. There's far too much noise. I want to hear from the member for Chisholm.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. What are some of the actions the Albanese Labor government has taken during its first year in office to create a stronger foundation for a better future? And how will the government build on this over the next 2 years?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Chisholm for her question. I thank her for the contribution she made to us being able to sit on this side of the chamber by winning her seat on the 21st of May of last year. 1 year ago, Australians did vote for change. The next day, we began the work of building a better future, and by this day, 1 year ago, we were heading to the Quad Leaders meeting to re-engage with the world, particularly the United States, Japan and India, to drive that change through with our renewed commitment to acting on climate change and engaging in our region. On election night, I said that a government that I lead will have two important values. No one left behind, because Labor will always stand up for the disadvantaged, but also no one held back, because Labor is the party that believes in aspiration and opportunity for Australians. And I'm proud of what we've achieved in our first year. More jobs being created in our first year than any previous new government on record. Historic investments in Medicare, cheaper childcare, fee-free TAFE, cheaper medicines, getting wages moving, acting on climate change. These are very strong foundations for the better future that we promised. We know there is so much more work to do, and we don't take the privilege that we have of being the government for granted on any day. But we inherited a decade of delay, denial and inaction, a decade of division and chaos on the other side, where they had 3 different Prime Ministers over that period. So I know the opportunity to shape that future is a privilege, and Australia need us and have trusted us to keep investing in affordable housing, strengthening Medicare, creating more secure jobs, training Australians for those secure jobs, and making more things here in Australia, powered by homegrown renewable energy. Importantly, we understand that facing our challenges and seizing those opportunities that are there depends on bringing the country together. We are a government with a sense of purpose, and when it comes to creating and seizing those opportunities and engaging with the regions of the world, we'll continue to put forward a positive agenda. We'll continue to reject the sort of scare campaigns that we've seen reflected again in the nature of the questions that we've been asked today, where at the same time as welcoming Prime Minister Modi and the Indian diaspora here, we have questions about people coming to Australia to make Australia their home. And the students who are coming here as well is a good thing, and that will be the message that I give, as I give to other communities, that this is a great country, will be even better in the future. And I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.